You don't see it coming. That's the first thing people need to understand. You think you know your life. You think you understand the people in it. You think the foundation you've built is solid. And then it isn't. My name is Daniel Cross, 49 years old, 23 years married to a woman named Victoria, who I thought was my partner, my equal, my person. 15 years running a consulting firm specializing in government contract compliance and regulatory strategy, boring work that paid extremely well because governments and corporations will pay anything to avoid regulatory disasters. Annual revenue at peak, $12 million, net profit margin, roughly 50%. Personal net worth after years of careful management and reinvestment, approximately $6.3 million in liquid assets, plus the business itself, plus real estate, plus retirement accounts. I was successful, comfortable, secure in a way that comes from building something over decades rather than getting lucky once. And then Victoria started sleeping with Congressman Marcus Henley. I didn't know at first. Nobody knows at first. That's how affairs work. They exist in spaces you're not looking, in hours you think are accounted for but aren't, in explanations that sound reasonable until you examine them closely. She started attending more political fundraisers, more networking events, more professional development conferences that required overnight stays. I encouraged it. I thought she was building her own career, her own network, her own identity outside of being Daniel's wife. I was proud of her. I was a fucking idiot. The affair lasted approximately 9 months before I found out. Not because I was clever or suspicious, but because Victoria stopped being careful, started making mistakes, came home with different perfume, had phone conversations that ended abruptly when I entered rooms, smiled at texts she wouldn't show me, classic signs, textbook betrayal. I confronted her one evening in February, 8 months after it started, showed her the evidence I'd gathered. Nothing dramatic, just phone records, credit card statements showing hotel rooms I knew she hadn't stayed in alone. She didn't deny it, didn't apologize, just looked at me with something like pity and said, "Marcus understands ambition. You never did." Marcus. Congressman Marcus Henley, Democrat from our state, serving his 4th term, married with 2 adult children, member of the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, the committee that reviews the kind of government contracts my firm helped companies navigate. The affair wasn't just personal, it was strategic, and I was about to learn exactly how strategic. Within 2 weeks of that confrontation, 3 of my largest clients called to pause their contracts. Not cancel, pause. Temporary hold while they reevaluated their consulting needs. All 3 were companies with significant government contract exposure. All 3 had relationships with Congress. All 3, I'd later learn, had received friendly suggestions from certain congressional offices that perhaps they should reconsider their consultant relationships. Within a month, 2 more clients dropped us entirely. One cited budget constraints. Another said they were moving in-house. Both were lies. Both were obviously lies. But they were lies I couldn't challenge without sounding paranoid. Within 6 weeks, the Department of Justice opened an investigation into my firm. Anonymous complaint regarding potential conflicts of interest in our advisory work. Nothing specific, nothing substantial, just enough smoke to make every current and potential client nervous about being associated with us. The investigation was bullshit. I knew it. My attorneys knew it. Anyone who looked closely knew it. But close examination takes time, takes resources, takes months or years to clear your name. And clients don't wait months or years. They move on. They find other consultants who aren't under federal investigation. They protect themselves by distancing themselves from anything that might become a problem. My revenue dropped 80% in 3 months. I had overhead, office space, staff salaries, insurance, technology infrastructure. I had operating costs built for a $12 million annual business. Those costs don't disappear just because revenue does. I burned through cash reserves trying to keep the firm alive. hoping the investigation would resolve quickly, hoping clients would come back once they saw there was nothing there, hoping I could ride out the storm. But the storm was manufactured, and manufactured storms don't end. They intensify until they accomplish their purpose. By month 6, I had to lay off all my employees. By month 7, I had to close the office. By month 8, the investigation was still ongoing, and my business was functionally dead. By month 9, I was negotiating payment plans with creditors and liquidating assets to cover debts. Victoria filed for divorce in month 4. While the business was dying, while the investigation was destroying my reputation, while I was fighting to keep everything from collapsing, she filed and she took everything the law allowed her to take. California is a community property state. Marital assets get split 50-50, with some exceptions and negotiations. Our marital assets, accumulated over 23 years, included the business I'd built, now worth nothing, our primary residence, $1.8 million, investment accounts, $4.2 million, retirement accounts, another $2.1 million. The house got sold. Proceeds split. The retirement accounts got divided. The investment accounts, representing years of careful wealth building, got divided. My half, after legal fees, after debt settlement, after everything, approximately $2.1 million, which sounds like a lot until you realize I was 49 years old, unemployable in my field due to the federal investigation, and facing continued legal costs to defend myself against allegations that were false but persistent. I tried to find work, tried to rebuild, tried to convince people that the investigation was politically motivated retaliation for a personal conflict, not evidence of actual wrongdoing. Nobody wanted to hear it. Nobody wanted to risk it. I was toxic, tainted, the guy under federal investigation who couldn't keep his wife or his business. By month 12, the investigation finally closed. No charges filed, no wrongdoing found, nothing except a letter from the DOJ saying they'd completed their review and found no basis for prosecution. A full year of my life destroyed, my business dead, my reputation shattered, my marriage over, and the DOJ's conclusion was basically our bad false alarm. By month 15, I was down to $800,000 in liquid assets after legal fees, living expenses, and the costs of trying to restart something that nobody wanted me to restart. By month 18, I was down to $400,000. By month 20, I was down to $150,000. I was burning through money trying to stay afloat in an industry that had locked me out, trying to rebuild credibility that had been systematically destroyed, trying to survive in a world that had decided I was finished. At month 22, I ran into Victoria at a charity gala. She was there with Marcus Henley. They looked happy, successful, powerful. She was wearing a dress that cost more than my monthly expenses. She saw me, came over. Marcus stayed back, talking to donors, confident enough in his position that he didn't need to acknowledge me. "Daniel," she said, smiling that smile I used to love and now found repulsive. "I heard you're struggling." "I'm managing." "That's not what I heard. I heard you're almost broke. I heard nobody will work with you. I heard you're basically unemployable." I didn't respond. "You should have been smarter," she continued. "Should have understood how things work. Marcus tried to explain it to you. This is a relationship business. You make the wrong enemies, you pay the price." I didn't make enemies. I had a wife who slept with a congressman who then used his position to destroy me professionally. That's a very dramatic interpretation. It's an accurate interpretation. She laughed. Actually laughed. Light, genuine amusement at my situation. "You'll never recover from this," she said, still smiling. "You know that, right? You're done. Finished. 49 years old, broke, blacklisted. What are you going to do? Start over? Become someone new?" She patted my arm with mock sympathy. "You had your chance. You built something decent. And then you lost it because you couldn't adapt. Couldn't understand that power matters more than principle. That's on you." She walked away, rejoined Marcus. They left together, probably to some expensive dinner, some exclusive event, some gathering of people who matter. And I stood there, in a borrowed suit, with $150,000 left to my name, and understood fully and completely that she was right. I was never going to recover. Not because I wasn't capable, but because the system was rigged against me. Because powerful people had decided I was finished. And once powerful people decide that, it becomes true through sheer force of collective agreement. I was done. At 49. With nothing. Before we continue, I need to pause here for something important. If you're finding this story compelling, don't forget to like and subscribe, and hit that hype button to boost this episode's reach. Drop a comment below with your city or country. I'm always curious where viewers are joining from, and it helps me understand who's connecting with these stories. Now, let's get back to what happened next. The months after that conversation blurred together, not because they were eventless, but because they were repetitively awful in ways that stopped being distinct and just become a general state of collapse. I tried to find work outside my industry, anything that would pay bills and give me purpose. Applied for corporate positions using my MBA and my years of strategic consulting experience. Got interviews. Got to final rounds. Then someone would Google my name, find the federal investigation, find the whispers and rumors, and suddenly the position would be filled, or they'd decided to go in a different direction. I wasn't unemployable because I was unqualified. I was unemployable because I was marked, contaminated by association with scandal, even though the scandal was manufactured. By month 24, 2 full years after Victoria had started sleeping with Marcus, I was down to $50,000, living in a 1-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood I'd never considered living in before, driving a 10-year-old Honda because I'd sold the BMW to extend my runway, shopping at discount grocery stores, calculating every expense. I wasn't destitute, not yet. But I could see destitute from where I stood, and I had nothing to look forward to. No career prospects, no professional network willing to risk association, no path back to the life I'd built, just a slow descent into irrelevance and poverty at an age where starting over wasn't just difficult. It was nearly impossible. My father had died 3 years earlier. Heart attack at 72, sudden and complete. He'd been a mechanical engineer, practical and methodical, the kind of man who kept detailed records and planned for contingencies. We'd had a good relationship, not emotionally demonstrative, but solid. Mutual respect, shared values. He'd left me his house, which I'd sold to help capitalize the business back when it was growing, some modest savings, which had been folded into the estate and eventually into my marriage assets, and a storage locker I'd been paying for monthly, but never actually visiting. The storage locker had been his workshop space. Tools, equipment, project materials. I'd kept paying the $140 monthly fee out of sentiment, but also out of avoidance. Going through a dead parent's possessions is emotional archaeology. Every item carries memory and meaning and the weight of time that won't come back. But at month 25, with my savings down to $40,000 and no income prospects, I couldn't afford sentiment anymore. I couldn't afford to pay $140 a month for space I wasn't using. I needed to clean out the locker, sell anything valuable, cancel the contract, cut another small expense from a life that had been reduced to small expenses. I drove to the storage facility on a Tuesday morning in October. One of those perfect autumn days that makes everything feel symbolic. Cool air, clear light, the sense that change is inevitable and already happening whether you're ready or not. The facility was in an industrial area south of downtown. Rows of identical orange metal doors under fluorescent lights. The kind of place where people store things they're not sure they need, but aren't ready to discard. Unit 347. I opened the combination lock, remembered the code from my father's papers, and rolled up the metal door. The space was exactly as I remembered from helping him move things in 7 years earlier. Organized, systematic, tools on pegboards, boxes labeled clearly, equipment covered with tarps. Everything neat and accessible in that way, my father approached all physical tasks, with precision and forethought. I spent the morning sorting, made piles, keep, small, sell, medium, donate, large. Most of the tools could be sold. Good quality equipment that would fetch something on Craigslist or at an estate sale company. The paperwork could be shredded. The project materials could be donated to a local makerspace. It was tedious, physical work that kept my mind occupied, kept me from thinking about the fact that I was 49 and liquidating my dead father's possessions to extend my financial runway by a few months. I was almost done, maybe 3 hours in, boxes sorted, equipment cataloged, when I found the envelope. It was in the back of a metal filing cabinet, in a folder labeled Personal Important. The envelope itself was letter-sized manila, sealed with tape that had yellowed slightly with age. Across the front, in my father's precise handwriting, "For Daniel. Open when you have nothing left." I stood there holding it, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, concrete floor cold beneath my feet, and felt something shift. My father had been practical, unsentimental, not given to dramatic gestures or cryptic messages. If he'd sealed an envelope and left specific instructions about when to open it, he had a reason, and the instruction was specific. When you have nothing left. Which is exactly where I was. I sat down on an old workshop stool, held the envelope for a long moment. Tried to imagine what my father could have left that would matter now. Money? He'd never been wealthy. Documents? Everything legal had been handled through the estate years ago. I opened the envelope carefully. Inside were 2 items, a folded piece of paper, a small brass key with a numbered tag. I unfolded the paper, his handwriting again, clear and methodical. Daniel. If you're reading this, something went very wrong. You're in a position you never anticipated. Possibly broke, possibly betrayed, possibly watching everything you built disappear. I prepared for this scenario not because I expected it, but because I understood it was possible. The world is not fair. Power matters more than merit. And sometimes good men get destroyed by people who are willing to be ruthless. The key opens a safe deposit box at United Bank, downtown branch. Box number 847. The documents inside represent a contingency I established 30 years ago and have maintained carefully since. I never told you about this because I hoped you'd never need it. But if you're reading this, you need it now. Use it wisely. Use it completely. And remember, recovery isn't about getting back what you lost. It's about understanding what you actually have. That was it. 9 sentences, 137 words, and a key. I read it 3 more times, tried to understand what he was telling me. What documents could matter now? What contingency could possibly help? My father had been an engineer, not a businessman, not a financier, not someone who moved in the kinds of circles where contingency planning involved mysterious safe deposit boxes. But he'd left this, hidden it, labeled it specifically for a crisis he'd anticipated might happen. I locked up the storage unit, drove downtown to United Bank. It was 2:30 p.m. on a Tuesday. The bank was quiet, a few tellers, a loan officer at a desk, older building with marble floors and that particular banking atmosphere of hushed seriousness. I approached the safe deposit desk, showed ID, explained I had a key for box 847, but didn't have my name on the account. The woman, 50s, professional, bored, checked her system. "The box is registered to Thomas Cross," she said. "That was my father. He died 3 years ago." "Do you have documentation showing you're the executor or beneficiary?" I did. I'd brought the estate papers just in case. She reviewed them, made copies, verified my ID against the documents. "Box 847, she confirmed. "Follow me." We went into the vault. Rows of metal boxes, floor to ceiling. She used her key and my key together. Dual control, security protocol. The box slid out. "Take your time," she said, gesturing to a private room. I carried the box to the small, windowless room, closed the door, sat at the desk. The box was larger than I expected. Not the small jewelry box size, but the document-sized version. Heavy. I opened it. Inside were 3 large manila envelopes, each labeled in my father's handwriting. Envelope 1, corporate records. Envelope 2, property documents. Envelope 3, instructions. I opened. Envelope 3 first. Instructions seemed like the logical starting point. Inside was a typed document, 5 pages, dated and signed by my father. The date was from 28 years ago, 2 years before I'd started my consulting firm, back when I was still in graduate school. I started reading, and slowly, carefully, began to understand what my father had done. The document was structured like a technical manual, systematic, clear, building from foundation to application. My father explaining a system he'd designed decades ago, maintained carefully, and hidden completely until it was needed. The summary, in his words. In 1997, I established 3 legal entities using structures that were common then, but would be unusual now. I did this not because I had specific wealth to protect, but because I understood that asset protection and strategic positioning matter more than most people realize. The entities are 1. Cross Holdings LLC, Delaware. 2. Silver Point Property Trust, Nevada. 3. Precision Data Systems Inc., Wyoming. Each entity was established with minimal capital, but maintained with proper documentation, annual filings, and legitimate business purpose. Each entity has been dormant, but legally active for 28 years. You are listed as the beneficial owner of all 3 entities. This was established through trust structures at formation. You've technically owned these entities since you were 24 years old. You just didn't know it. I stopped reading. Reread that section 3 times. I'd owned 3 legal entities for 28 years without knowing it? That didn't make sense. Why wouldn't my father tell me? Why create entities in my name but keep them secret? I kept reading. The entities were established with specific purposes. Cross Holdings LLC was designed to hold intellectual property and business assets. Currently, it holds the trademark and certain brand elements for several names I registered over the years, including Crosspoint Consulting, which I registered in 1999, 2 years before you started your firm with a slightly different name. Silver Point Property Trust holds title to certain property interests. Specifically, it holds a 15% limited partnership interest in a commercial property in downtown, a building I invested in 30 years ago with money I'd saved. The investment was small, $25,000, but the building has appreciated significantly. Current estimated value of the 15% interest, approximately $800,000. Precision Data Systems Inc. holds various patents and technical documentation related to engineering work I did in the early 1990s. Some of these patents relate to data systems architecture that has become increasingly relevant with modern database technology. The patents are set to expire in the next few years, but they cover certain foundational concepts that remain valuable. I sat back, tried to process what I was reading. My father, a mechanical engineer who lived modestly, never talked about investments or business strategy, never seemed particularly interested in wealth building, had created a network of legal entities, invested in commercial property, registered trademarks and patents, and structured everything so that I was the beneficial owner. And he'd never mentioned it. Not when I started my consulting firm, not when I was building the business, not even when he was dying. He'd just left it there. Waiting. The document continued. I never told you about these entities for several reasons. First, I didn't want you to rely on them. You needed to build your own success, your own way. Having a safety net changes how you take risks. I wanted you to take smart risks without the false confidence of hidden assets. Second, I didn't want these entities visible in your life. In divorces, bankruptcy, lawsuits, people go after what they can see, what they know about. These entities have never appeared in your financial statements, never been part of your business, never been connected to you publicly. They're completely separate. Third, I wanted to make sure you only accessed this if you truly needed it. If you're reading this, you've lost what you built. You're starting over. These entities aren't a replacement for what you lost. They're a foundation for what you'll build next. The document then explained the specific assets in detail. The trademark Crosspoint Consulting was mine to use. My firm had been called Cross Consulting Group. Different name, no trademark issues. But Crosspoint was available, registered, protected. And because it had been maintained for decades, it had seniority over any newer trademarks in the same space. The property interest in Silver Point Property Trust was real and valuable. The building was a Class A office tower downtown. The limited partnership interest entitled me to 15% of net revenues and 15% of proceeds if the property ever sold. Recent appraisals put the building's value at $5.3 million, my 15% stake, approximately $800,000. And the partnership generated annual distributions. My share was roughly $35,000 per year, which had been automatically deposited into a trust account I'd never known existed. The patents held by Precision Data Systems Inc. covered certain database architecture concepts. Most were old and near expiration, but 3 patents covered foundational structures that were still relevant to modern cloud database systems. Companies had been licensing these patents for years. The licensing revenue was modest, maybe $15,000 annually, but consistent. And the patents had defensive value. Someone trying to build certain types of data systems would need to license or work around these patents. I finished reading the document, sat in the silent room with 3 envelopes full of supporting documentation. My father had given me $800,000 in property equity, $50,000 per year in passive income, a clean trademark, and defensive intellectual property. None of which Victoria knew about. None of which had been part of the divorce settlement. None of which appeared in any financial disclosure I'd made because I hadn't known it existed. It wasn't a fortune. It wasn't enough to restore everything I'd lost. But it was enough to stop the descent. Enough to have options. Enough to rebuild from a position of stability rather than desperation. I opened the other envelopes. Corporate records showing my ownership. Property documents proving the trust interest. Patent certificates and licensing agreements. Everything documented. Everything legitimate, everything maintained properly for decades. My father had built me a safety net that was invisible until the moment I needed it. And now I needed it. I left the bank with copies of everything, drove home in a daze, spent the evening reading through documents, trying to understand the full scope of what I'd inherited. It wasn't just money, it was structure, it was positioning. It was the legal framework to rebuild without starting from zero. The property income alone would cover my basic expenses. The trademark gave me the foundation for a new consulting practice. Different name, different brand, technically separate from the firm that had been destroyed. The patents gave me leverage in conversations with technology companies that might need licensing or consulting around data architecture. None of it was obvious wealth. None of it would show up on social media or impress people at parties, but all of it was real value, real capability, real options. That night, for the first time in 2 years, I slept without the weight of impending financial catastrophe pressing down on my chest. I wasn't rich, I wasn't restored, I wasn't back to where I'd been, but I wasn't finished either. And that distinction, between being broke and being finished, was everything. Recovery, I learned, doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come with dramatic moments or sudden reversals. It comes slowly, through consistent decisions compounded over time, through patience and strategic positioning. I didn't call Victoria, didn't announce my inheritance, didn't make social media posts about resilience or comeback stories, just started working quietly with what I had. Step 1 was stabilizing my financial situation. The property trust distributions were real income, $35,000 annually, paid quarterly. Not enough to live luxuriously, but enough to cover rent, food, basic expenses. The patent licensing added another $15,000. I suddenly had $50,000 in passive income I hadn't known existed. That meant I could stop burning through savings just to survive, could plan more than 3 months ahead, could make decisions based on strategy rather than desperation. Step 2 was understanding my new assets. I spent weeks reading through the corporate documents, the property agreements, the patent descriptions, called the property management company to introduce myself as the limited partner, verified the distributions, reviewed the building's financials, called the patent licensing agent to understand the current agreements and upcoming renewals. Everything was legitimate. Everything was properly maintained. My father had been meticulous. Step 3 was leveraging the trademark. Crosspoint Consulting was a good name, professional, memorable, and it had 30 years of trademark protection, which gave it weight and legitimacy. I built a new website, established a new LLC under that name, positioned myself as an independent consultant rather than trying to rebuild the old firm. But I didn't go after my old market, didn't try to compete with the consulting firms that had taken my clients. That market was poisoned. Everyone knew the story. Government investigation, federal scrutiny, messy divorce. True or not, fair or not, the perception was toxic. Instead, I pivoted to a different market. Small technology companies that needed help navigating regulatory compliance around data systems. Companies too small to afford big consulting firms, but sophisticated enough to need real expertise. Companies that cared more about technical competence than political connections. The patents gave me credibility. I wasn't just a consultant, I was someone who held foundational IP in database architecture. That meant something to technology companies. It signaled depth of knowledge, not just consulting experience. I started small, posted on professional forums, offered free initial consultations, built case studies from the work I did, charged modest rates at first, not because I had to, but because I was rebuilding credibility, proving value, demonstrating that the federal investigation had been political retaliation, not evidence of incompetence. Month 1 of the rebuild, 2 clients, $8,000 in consulting revenue. Month 2, 4 clients, $18,000. Month 3, 6 clients, $28,000. Not dramatic growth, not the kind of revenue that would impress anyone, but consistent, organic growth from a base of actual value delivered. Clients who hired me because I solved their problems, not because of reputation or connections. By month 6, I was making $45,000 monthly in consulting revenue, plus the $50,000 annually in passive income. I was profitable, stable, building momentum, and I was completely invisible to my old world. Victoria didn't know. Marcus didn't know. The people who'd destroyed my previous firm didn't know I was rebuilding. They thought I was broke and broken and gone, which was exactly what I needed them to think. Because the second part of my father's gift wasn't just the financial assets, it was the strategic insight buried in his instructions. People go after what they can see. My previous firm had been visible. Large office, staff, client list published on the website, revenue estimates available through public filings. Everything transparent, everything trackable, everything targetable. This new practice was invisible. One-person operation working from home. No staff, no office, no public client list. Revenue flowing through entities that weren't connected to my name. Everything private, everything quiet, everything protected. I could build something substantial without anyone noticing until it was too late to stop. Year 2 of the rebuild, I was making $650,000 annually in consulting revenue. Still small by the standards of my old firm, but profitable and sustainable. I hired 2 contractors, independent specialists who worked on project basis, no permanent staff, no overhead exposure. Expanded into adjacent markets, started working with mid-sized companies, not just small startups. The property trust distributed $42,000 that year. The building had refinanced, improved cash flow. The patents generated $19,000 in licensing. My total income crossed $700,000. I lived on $120,000, saved and invested the rest, rebuilt my net worth systematically, paid off the remaining debts from the divorce and business collapse, started contributing aggressively to retirement accounts again. By year 3, my net worth crossed $1 million, not from one big win, but from consistent profitability and disciplined saving. I was 41 years old, 3 years older than when everything collapsed, but financially stable in a way I hadn't been since before the divorce, and still completely invisible to the people who destroyed me. I heard about them occasionally. Victoria was still with Marcus. They'd gotten married. His first wife had finally agreed to a divorce after the scandal became old news. Victoria was playing the political spouse role, appearing at fundraisers, hosting events, positioning herself in the social sphere she'd always wanted. Marcus was still in Congress, still on the oversight committee, still wielding the power he'd used to destroy my consulting firm. His career had barely been dented by the affair. If anything, divorcing his first wife and marrying Victoria had humanized him, made him seem passionate rather than calculating. They'd won. By every visible measure, they'd completely won. They just didn't know what invisible actually meant. Year 4 brought opportunity disguised as complication. One of my consulting clients, Meridian Systems, a data analytics company, called for an urgent meeting. Their CEO explained they were being acquired by Titan Strategic Solutions, a defense contractor. Good news, except for one problem. During due diligence, their legal team discovered we're potentially infringing on certain patents. 3 patents related to distributed data systems, held by something called Precision Data Systems, Inc. We need to license them or the acquisition falls apart. My attention sharpened. Those were my patents, from my father's contingency. Have you contacted the patent holder? We're trying, but it seems to be a shell company. No active website, no public contact. We found a licensing agent, but they're not responsive. Because I'd never told the agent I'd inherited ownership. Let me make some calls, I said. Maybe I can help you track down the right contacts. I went home and took formal control of Precision Data Systems through the licensing agent, then instructed them to reach out to Meridian with a proposal. $250,000 up front for a perpetual license, plus 2% of revenue from products using the patented architecture, capped at $100,000 annually. For Meridian, this was reasonable. For me, it was $250,000 immediate capital plus ongoing revenue. The agent made contact. Meridian's legal team reviewed, called it fair, executed the agreement within 3 weeks. I attended the closing meeting as their compliance consultant, watched them sign the licensing agreement with an entity they didn't know I owned, watched them pay $250,000 to me, indirectly, completely legal, completely ethical, completely invisible. The Titan acquisition closed on schedule. Meridian's founders made millions. I continued my consulting work, now with Titan as the parent company, and I had $250,000 in new capital, plus ongoing licensing revenue that would compound as the technology expanded. More importantly, I'd learned something. The assets my father had given me weren't just financial. They were strategic. They created opportunities that didn't exist if people knew I owned them. Invisibility wasn't just protection, it was leverage. Year 5 brought the shift I'd been waiting for without quite knowing I was waiting for it. I'd rebuilt enough, consulting practice generating $850,000 annually, net worth approaching $2 million. But I was still operating in the margins, still invisible, still disconnected from the networks that had defined my previous career. That started to change. A former client called, someone who dropped my previous firm during the federal investigation. Daniel, I heard you're working again, under a different name. I am. Small practice. Different focus. Meridian spoke highly of you, said you helped them navigate complex IP issues. Would you be interested in working with us again? I thought about it. This was a bridge back to my old market. but it was also validation that good work matters more than political history if you're patient enough. I'd be interested, I said. One client became two became four. Word spread quietly that I was available, competent, and reasonably priced. Mid-tier companies started reaching out. Solid businesses that needed good work done reliably. By month 8, I was working with 12 clients, revenue approaching $1.2 million annually, starting to rebuild the professional reputation that had been destroyed. Then, I got an email from a partner at one of the big consulting firms, someone who'd benefited from my collapse. Subject: Congratulations. Heard you're back in the game, running Crosspoint Consulting. Good for you. A lot of people thought you were done. Nice to see you prove them wrong. I wrote back professionally. We met for coffee. You're really back, he said. People are noticing. There's been conversation in partner meetings about you. What kind of conversation? The kind where people realize they underestimated someone, where they start thinking about opportunities to collaborate. He proposed a referral relationship. His firm would send work they couldn't handle, clients too small or too technical. I'd pay 15% of first-year revenue as a referral fee. Smart business for both of us. He monetized relationships he couldn't serve directly. I got access to qualified leads without heavy marketing. 3 referrals came in the first month, all converted. By end of year 5, Crosspoint Consulting generated $1.4 million annually. I had relationships with 2 major firms referring overflow work. Direct clients finding me through word of mouth. Property income and patent licensing providing stability. Net worth, $2.5 million. I was 54, 5 years older than when everything collapsed. But financially stable, professionally respected, strategically positioned. And still, Victoria didn't know. Still, Marcus didn't know. Still, the people who'd destroyed me thought I was finished, until one of them finally heard a rumor. The call came from my sister. We'd maintained a relationship through everything, not close, but not estranged. She'd stayed neutral during the divorce, sympathetic to my situation, but careful not to take sides publicly. Called every few months to check in, asked how I was doing, offered support in the abstract way people offer support when they're not sure what concrete help looks like. Danny, she said, using the childhood name she'd mostly dropped decades ago. I need to tell you something. Okay. I ran into Victoria last week at a fundraiser. My stomach tightened slightly. Okay. She asked about you, asked how you were doing, if I'd heard from you, what you were up to. What did you tell her? I said you were fine, working again, doing consulting, seemed to be doing well. And she didn't believe me, said she'd heard you were still struggling, still unemployed, still broke. Why would she think that? I don't know. But she seemed very certain, almost happy about it, like she'd confirmed something she wanted to be true. I didn't respond immediately. Danny, are you really doing okay? Because if you need anything... I'm fine, I said. I'm actually doing really well, better than fine. Really? Really. Then why haven't you told anyone? Why does Victoria think you're still broke? Because I wanted her to think that. I wanted everyone who destroyed me to think I never recovered. Silence on the other end. Why? She asked finally. Because people leave you alone when they think you're not a threat, when they think you're finished, and I needed to rebuild without anyone paying attention. So you've been hiding? Pretending to be worse off than you are? Not pretending, just not advertising. There's a difference. How well are you really doing? I thought about whether to tell her, decided she'd earned honesty. My consulting practice generates about $1.4 million annually. I have other income sources. My net worth is approaching $3 million. I'm not where I was before, but I'm stable and growing. Long silence. Jesus, Danny, that's really good. Why didn't you tell me? Because telling people creates obligations, creates expectations, creates targets. I learned the hard way that success is safer when it's invisible. So Victoria thinks you're broke, but you're actually doing well. Very well. She's going to find out eventually. Maybe. But by the time she does, it won't matter. I'll be established enough that there's nothing she can do about it. My sister was quiet for a moment. Then, she destroyed you on purpose. She used Marcus's position to ruin you professionally. You know that, right? I know. And you're just going to let that go? Just rebuild quietly and never confront her? Confronting her would accomplish what exactly? Make her feel bad? Make Marcus feel guilty? They don't feel bad or guilty. They feel successful. The best response isn't confrontation. It's living well despite what they did. That's very mature of you. It's not maturity. It's strategy. They think they won. I want them to keep thinking that until it's too late for them to interfere again. When will it be too late? When I'm established enough that destroying me again would cost them more than they'd gain. When attacking me would make them look petty rather than powerful. When their best move is to pretend I don't exist. Are you there yet? Almost. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, I'm proud of you. I didn't understand what you were doing, but I'm proud of you. Thanks. Are you going to tell Victoria? Eventually? No, but she'll find out anyway. People always do. I was right. 2 weeks after that conversation, I got an email from victoria.cross@henley@gmail.com. Subject, I heard a rumor. Body. Daniel, someone told me you're working again, running a consulting practice, apparently doing well enough that people are talking about it. I wanted to reach out to say I'm glad. I never wanted you to be destroyed permanently. I wanted you to learn a lesson, but not be broken forever. If what I'm hearing is true, maybe you learned it. Maybe you understand now how things work. That power matters. That relationships matter. That you can't just be good at your job and expect that to be enough. I hope you're doing well. Really. Victoria. I read it 3 times. Analyzed the tone, the patronizing sympathy, the assumption that I'd learned a lesson from the destruction she'd orchestrated, the belief that she'd been teaching me something rather than simply hurting me for her own benefit. I wrote back, Victoria, I am doing well. Thank you for your concern. You're right that I learned lessons, though probably not the ones you think. I learned that being invisible is safer than being visible. That building slowly is more sustainable than building flashy. That power matters less than people think if you're patient enough to wait for it to shift. I hope you're doing well too. Daniel. I hit send before I could second-guess the response. She wrote back within an hour. What does that mean? Power matters less than people think if you're patient enough to wait for it to shift? Are you threatening something? I smiled at that. The paranoia, the assumption that I had plans, the fear that maybe I wasn't as finished as she'd thought. Not threatening anything, just observing that circumstances change. People who seem powerful in one moment become less powerful in the next, and people who seem finished sometimes aren't. But that's just philosophy, not a threat. Congratulations on your marriage. I heard you and Marcus are happy. I didn't hear back, but 3 days later, my sister called again. Victoria called me, she said. Asked very specific questions about your consulting business. What kind of work you do, who your clients are, how successful you really are. She was fishing. What did you tell her? I told her I didn't know the details, that you and I don't talk about business, that you seem fine but I don't have specifics. Good. Danny, why is she fishing? What's she worried about? She's worried that I'm not broken, that destroying me didn't work, that maybe I'm a problem she needs to manage again. Are you? A problem for her? Not yet. But maybe someday. That sounds ominous. It's not ominous. It's just true. Right now, I'm nobody to her. Just her ex-husband who rebuilt quietly in a different market. But if I keep growing, if I start operating in the same circles as Marcus, If I become visible again, then I might become a problem, a reminder of what they did, a potential source of scandal or embarrassment. Would you do that? Try to expose them? No, but they don't know that, and uncertainty is almost as powerful as actual threat. My sister laughed. You've changed. I've learned. From the destruction? From my father. He understood that power isn't always obvious, that preparation matters more than revenge, that the best way to win is to be positioned correctly when circumstances shift. Do you think circumstances will shift? They always do. Eventually. I was right about that too, but I didn't expect it to happen as quickly or as dramatically as it did. 6 months after Victoria's email, Marcus Henley was indicted on federal corruption charges, not because of me, not because of anything related to our history, just because power and money and politics eventually create opportunities for enforcement, and Marcus had been sloppy. The charges were complicated: campaign finance violations, misuse of official position, accepting improper gifts from defense contractors seeking favorable oversight. The kind of things career politicians do routinely, but that become crimes when prosecutors decide to make examples. The indictment was public, immediate media coverage. Marcus held a press conference denying everything, promising to fight the charges, claiming political persecution. Victoria stood next to him, playing the supportive spouse role. I watched the press conference on my laptop, studied Victoria's face. She looked confident, composed, like she believed Marcus would survive this the way powerful men usually survive scandal. But I knew something she didn't. Marcus's defense was going to be expensive, really expensive. Federal corruption trials involve multiple attorneys, expert witnesses, PR consultants, months of preparation. Even if Marcus was ultimately acquitted, the cost would be catastrophic. And there was another problem. The Oversight Committee immediately suspended Marcus pending investigation. He couldn't serve on the committee that reviewed government contracts while facing charges related to government contractor relationships. Standard procedure, probably temporary. But even temporary loss of committee assignment meant loss of leverage, loss of the relationships and access that had made Marcus powerful, loss of the ability to help or hurt people in ways that mattered. And without that power, Marcus became just another congressman facing legal trouble. Useful to some, radioactive to others, uncertain in ways that made everyone cautious. I watched this unfold over several weeks. The indictment, the media coverage, the slow backing away of people who'd been close to Marcus, the quiet distancing that happens when someone becomes liability rather than asset. I did nothing, reached out to no one, made no public statements, just watched and waited. 3 months after the indictment, I got another email from Victoria. Subject: We need to talk. Body: Daniel, I know we haven't spoken in years except for brief exchanges. I know our history is complicated, but I need to ask you something directly. Marcus is facing significant legal costs. The trial is going to be expensive. We're looking at depleting savings, possibly selling assets. It's going to be very difficult. I heard your consulting practice is doing well. I heard you've rebuilt substantially. I don't know if that's true or exaggerated, but if it is true, I wanted to ask if you'd be willing to help. Not for me, not even for Marcus, but for the fact that we were married for 23 years, that we built a life together, that maybe you remember a time when we cared about each other. I know I hurt you. I know what happened with Marcus was wrong. I know the way your business was destroyed was cruel and unfair. I'm not asking you to forget that or forgive it. I'm just asking if you can help anyway. Because that's what good people do. They help even when it's hard. Please think about it. Victoria. I read the email carefully, multiple times, analyzed the tone, the appeals, the carefully constructed vulnerability. She was asking me for money. The woman who destroyed my business, taken half my wealth, and laughed at my financial ruin, she was asking me for money, because Marcus's legal defense was expensive and they'd depleted their resources and they needed help from someone who wouldn't publicize their desperation. I thought about my father's letter, the 9 words that had changed everything. Recovery isn't about getting back what you lost. It's about understanding what you actually have. What did I actually have? Financial stability, professional reputation, strategic positioning, assets that were invisible but real. And something else, the choice of how to respond to people who'd hurt me when they came asking for help. I could help. I had resources, not endless resources, but enough that writing a check for $100,000 or even $200,000 wouldn't destroy me, would barely impact my financial position. But helping would mean something, would establish something, would confirm that despite everything they'd done, they could still ask, and I would give, or I could decline. Could tell Victoria that I wasn't the right person to help, that my resources were committed elsewhere, that I couldn't sacrifice my own stability to fund Marcus's legal defense. I sat with the decision for 3 days, thought about what my father would have done, what he would have wanted me to do, decided that recovery wasn't just about finances, it was about character, about being the kind of person who makes decisions from strength rather than weakness, from principle rather than emotion. I wrote back, Victoria, I appreciate you reaching out. I understand the situation is difficult. I'm not able to help financially, not because I'm vindictive or angry, but because I've learned that helping people who hurt you doesn't heal the wound. It just extends the relationship that caused the wound in the first place. You and Marcus made choices that destroyed my business and took years of my life. Those choices benefited you and cost me enormously. I rebuilt from that destruction, but I rebuilt by establishing boundaries and understanding that I don't owe rescue to people who hurt me deliberately. I genuinely hope you find the resources you need. I hope Marcus's legal situation resolves favorably. I hope you both learn something valuable from this experience. But I'm not the solution to your problem. And expecting me to be suggests you still don't understand what you did or why it mattered. I wish you well. Really, but from a distance. Daniel, I hit send. Felt nothing. No satisfaction, no guilt, no anger. Just clarity that I'd made the right choice for me. She wrote back, I thought you'd changed. I thought you'd become a bigger person. I guess I was wrong. I didn't respond to that. 3 weeks later, Marcus's legal team announced a plea deal. Reduced charges, no jail time, significant fines, resignation from Congress. He'd survive, but his career was over. Victoria filed for divorce 6 months later. Their marriage had lasted 4 years, shorter than the time it took me to rebuild from the destruction they'd caused. I heard about all this through my sister, through professional networks, through the general gossip that circulates when powerful people fall. And I thought about my father's letter, about the preparation he'd done decades earlier, about the safety net he'd built for a crisis he'd anticipated might happen. He'd given me more than money. He'd given me the framework to understand that recovery isn't about winning. It's about surviving with integrity intact. It's about building something that can't be destroyed just because someone powerful decides to hurt you. Victoria had laughed and said I'd never recover. My father had made sure I could. And that difference, between being destroyed and being prepared, was everything. 5 years after opening the envelope. 10 years after Victoria's affair destroyed my first consulting firm. 59 years old. Crosspoint Consulting generated $2.1 million in annual revenue. I employed 4 full-time consultants and maintained relationships with a network of contractors who specialized in different technical areas. We served mid-sized technology companies navigating complex regulatory environments. Good work, well-compensated, sustainable. The property trust distributions had grown to $58,000 annually as the building appreciated and rents increased. The patent licensing generated $32,000. Combined passive income, $90,000. Total annual income, roughly $2.2 million. Net worth, $5.4 million. I'd recovered, not to where I'd been. That person and that business were gone. But to somewhere different. Somewhere more sustainable. somewhere built on foundation that couldn't be destroyed by political connections or personal betrayal. My father had anticipated this, had prepared for it, had given me the tools to survive when survival seemed impossible. I visited his grave on the anniversary of finding the envelope, brought flowers, stood in silence. "You were right," I said aloud to the headstone, "about everything, about power and preparation and understanding what matters." A car pulled into the cemetery. I glanced over, then looked again. Victoria. She parked several rows away, didn't see me, got out carrying flowers. Walked to a grave site I didn't recognize, stood there for several minutes. I watched from a distance. She looked older, not dramatically aged, but worn in subtle ways. The confidence I remembered had been replaced by something more cautious, more uncertain. She finished her visit, turned to leave, saw me. We stood 50 feet apart, cemetery pathways between us, 10 years of history contained in the space. She walked toward me, slowly, stopped about 10 feet away. "Daniel." "Victoria." "What are you doing here?" "Visiting my father's grave." She glanced at the headstone. "He died years ago." "I know. I still visit sometimes." Awkward silence. "You did recover," she said finally. "I heard you're doing well. Really well." "I'm doing fine. More than fine, from what I've heard. Successful consulting practice. Financial stability. You rebuilt everything." "Not everything. Different things." "How?" she asked. The question wasn't hostile, just genuinely curious, like she couldn't understand how someone she'd destroyed had managed to survive. I thought about telling her, about the envelope, the letter, the key, about my father's preparation and the contingencies he'd built, about the invisible assets that had saved me. But I didn't. Because some things are private. Some victories don't need to be explained to the people who tried to prevent them. "I survived," I said simply. "Then I rebuilt. Same as anyone would." "But everyone said you were finished, that what Marcus did to your business was permanent, that you'd never work in the industry again." They were wrong. How did they not know? How did you rebuild without anyone noticing? I rebuilt in different markets, with different clients, using different strategies. I learned that visibility creates vulnerability, so I stayed invisible until I was strong enough that vulnerability didn't matter. She looked at me with something I couldn't quite identify. Not admiration exactly. Maybe respect. Maybe regret. "I was wrong," she said quietly. "About you. About what you were capable of. About what would happen after everything fell apart." "You were. I thought destroying your business would end you. Thought you'd never recover from it. You thought that because it's what you wanted to believe. It made the betrayal easier to live with if you convinced yourself I deserved it." She didn't argue. "Do you hate me?" she asked. I thought about that. Realized the answer had changed somewhere along the way. "No," I said honestly. "I don't hate you. I don't think about you enough to hate you." "That's worse than hate." "Maybe, but it's true. You're part of my history, but not part of my present. What you did mattered for a while, but I built something new that doesn't involve you, so now you just don't matter." She looked away. "I deserved that." "Probably, but I'm not saying it to hurt you. I'm saying it because it's accurate. You're not part of my life anymore, not part of my thinking. You're just someone I used to know who made choices I had to survive." "And you did survive." "I did. Because of—" She gestured vaguely, asking what made the difference between destruction and recovery. "Because of preparation I didn't know existed. Because of a father who understood that bad things happen to good people and planned accordingly. Because of patience and strategic thinking and understanding that recovery takes time." "I'm sorry," she said suddenly. "For what I did, for what Marcus did, for all of it." I looked at her. studied her face, tried to determine if she meant it, decided it didn't matter. "Thank you," I said. "I appreciate that." "Does it change anything?" "No." "Because the damage is done?" "Because the damage was already survived. What I needed wasn't an apology. It was time and resources, and the framework to rebuild. I got those things. The apology is just acknowledgement, it's not repair." She nodded slowly. "You really did become a different person. Same person, different understanding of how the world works." "Marcus and I didn't work out," she said, changing the subject. "In case you hadn't heard." I heard. She paused. "He was everything I thought I wanted. Power, connections, ambition. But it turns out those things aren't enough when the foundation is betrayal." "Probably not." "Do you ever think about us? About what we were before everything went wrong?" "Sometimes, but not often. That version of us doesn't exist anymore." "No," she agreed. "It doesn't." We stood in silence. Nothing left to say. No reconciliation possible or needed. Just two people who'd once been married, standing in a cemetery, acknowledging that the past was past and the future would be separate. "I should go," she said. "Okay. Take care of yourself, Daniel." "You too." She walked away, got in her car, drove off. I turned back to my father's grave. "She thought she erased me," I said quietly to the headstone. "She thought destroying the business meant destroying the man." But my father had made sure I couldn't be erased, had built contingencies and structures and safety nets that existed outside the visible world, had prepared for disaster decades before it happened. And when disaster came, when Victoria and Marcus used power and politics to destroy everything I'd built, those contingencies had been there, waiting, ready. The letter had 9 words that mattered. Recovery isn't about getting back what you lost. It was about understanding what you actually have, about building from foundation rather than facade, about being prepared for the worst while hoping for the best. My father had understood that, had lived it, had taught it to me through careful planning and hidden preparation. And now, standing in the quiet cemetery, 10 years after everything collapsed, I understood it too. Victoria had laughed and said I'd never recover. My father had made sure I could. And that preparation, that gift of contingency and structure and invisible strength, had made all the difference. Not because it gave me revenge, not because it let me win, but because it let me survive, and survive well, and build something new that couldn't be destroyed the same way the old things had been destroyed. She thought she erased me. My father made sure I couldn't be. And those 9 words, sitting in an envelope in a storage locker waiting for the moment when I had nothing left, had changed everything. Not immediately, not dramatically, but completely, quietly, permanently, the way real change always happens. I touched the headstone once more, said goodbye, walked back to my car. Behind me, the cemetery was quiet. In front of me, the rest of my life waited, built on foundation, protected by preparation, sustained by understanding that power isn't always visible and recovery isn't always obvious. But both are real, if you're patient enough, if you're prepared enough, if you're willing to rebuild from nothing with structure that can't be seen but can't be destroyed. My father had taught me that, through 9 words and a key, and I'd learned it, through survival and patience and the long, quiet work of building something that lasts. She thought I'd never recover. She was wrong.